Hey everybody, Darren from the White Hatter team, and welcome to this session of Thinkable Thursday. Let's get after it. Welcome everybody to this final session on our series Thinkable Thursday for summer 2021. Like, who knew that the summer would go by this quickly? Unbelievable how quickly this summer has flown by. And I've left this topic for the very end. And the reason we wanted to leave this to the very end is because, like it or not, it's a little dark, right? It's a topic that we don't necessarily want to talk about as adults and adult caregivers, and even for adults who don't have kids necessarily, but it's something we got to be thinking about in today's on-life world. I like to call it on-life because there is no difference anymore between the real world and the online world. It's just one world, or what academia likes to call the on-life world. So, and what we're going to be talking about is what happens to these things that we like to call our digital assets upon our death or upon our passing, right? Because a lot of us think, well, you know what, I'll just hand over my passwords to my kids or to whoever I'm passing my stuff on in the will. But it's much deeper than that, as you will see in today's presentation. And you know what? I brought an expert into what it is we're going to be talking about. And her name is Sharon Hartung. And there she is right there. And you know what? She's Canadian, eh? She's Canadian, which is just great. And she's got a great background that we're going to be talking about in today's presentation, how she got to where she is today. I'll give you a little clue. She was an officer in the Canadian military. I'm not going to tell you what branch. I'm going to leave that to her to talk about. And she has become a subject matter expert on this topic. I mean, personally, I think she's one of the few people, I think she's the only one, who's really been talking about this topic to any degree. In fact, she has now written 2 books on the topic, and here they are right here. Here's her 2 books. One is called The Digital Undertaker, and that was the first book that she wrote. And the second book is The Digital Executor. And The Digital Undertaker, for me, it is more for people like you and me, right? For people who are considering about what to do with our digital assets when it comes to building estate plans and stuff. And then the second book, I think, is more geared towards those in the industry who do planning, right? I'm not saying that both can't read, but if for a lot of people who are watching right now, for mom and dad and grandma and grandpa, I think this would be the first book to start with right here. I think that would be the best book to start with. And she has a great website, and her website, there it is right there, Your Digital Undertaker.ca. I love the name. Like, when I first heard that name, I thought, oh, that's such a great name for the book. So let's bring her in. There she is right there. Good morning, Sharon. I understand you're in Ottawa, correct?
I'm actually in Vancouver today, so it's great to be meeting with you and Brandon.
What are you doing on the West Coast? You're from Ottawa, though, right?
Originally from Ottawa, but I actually now live in the West Coast.
Oh,
so I'm on the same time zone.
Right on. So let's share with everybody about who you are, what your background was. I kind of give a little clue, how you brought yourself to where you are today. Like, where did you get all this experience from and knowledge from, starting from your career in the military?
Well, thanks very much, Darren. I'm a big fan of the White Hatters team, so I'm really honored to be invited to have this discussion today. So thank you for that.
Tip of my white hat to you.
I've spent my entire career in information technology with different organizations, and I had the privilege of serving in the Royal Canadian Air Force. I was what was called an aerospace engineer. And I had the privilege of working in the branch of the military that looks after a lot of the parts and the software that runs on the aircraft, the various aircraft that the Canadian Forces have. I spent most of my time in Cold Lake, Alberta, with the fighter jets, working at a software engineering group there.
Did you fly in a jet?
So I learned all.
Did you fly in a jet?
I did not. I did not get to fly in the jet, but I got to fly in everything else. And one of the neat things in being a support branch like engineering in the military is you get to take all the training that the fighter jets get to take, with some exception. So you learn, how to get in the fly in the simulators. You get to take survival training.
Did you do the
It's pretty
G-force kind of?
tremendous.
Did you do that? Whatever that's called. What's that called again?
In the pulling G's in the simulator, yes.
Oh, very cool.
So they have lots of different simulators, including basically a full F-18 inside what looks like a dome, so that you can practice flying various scenarios. Although I always ask to be, start me at 40,000 feet, because I could never seem to take off and land on a carrier, because that obviously takes millions of dollars of training, right?
Right.
So tremendous experience. And one of the brilliant parts of the design is that the engineering support is right there on the flight line, with the customers. If you think of those in business terms, the people that are actually using the equipment. So I learned a lot about the embedded system software side, and then went on to Ottawa eventually to be a project manager and look after the equipment. I left the military to join IBM, and became an executive at IBM, managing a lot of large enterprise system development projects, and then looking after our maintenance division for Canada. And how I ended up in this space, it's IT, even though it's estate planning. My mother died without a will, and I didn't realize the big job of the executor. And so the first book talks a lot about, to understand how to plan for our digital lives in estate planning, we need to understand estate planning. So I cover a lot of what I learned being the junior project manager of my mother's estate. What is the role of the executor as a fiduciary? In Ontario, they call it estate trustee. In BC, we call it an executor. There's taxes, there's philanthropy and charitable organizations involved. So there's a lot of things that happen that we're not really familiar with unless we help somebody in that space. And another important chapter in the book, which is part of estate planning, is advanced care planning. So what documents to put in place if we become unable to speak for ourselves where we're living. Because you got to understand some of those basic terms in order to understand how to plan for our digital lives now.
It's kind of funny.
And this is where we are.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because Beth, I gave her probably about 4 Christmases ago, I bought her a specific journal. I mean, it looks like something that was created in the 1700s. I call it our death book. Right? Where everything, and I think it's more for me than her, because if she was to pass, I would be lost, because she looks after my bank, all our bank, like I would be lost, right? So, but she's created this book, and, a part of that is upon our death. Brandon knows exactly where this book is located, so a lot of the stuff is in there. But after reading your first book, I thought I knew a lot on this topic, right? On things that I need to be thinking about. But I never, ever considered issues such as, what about these other assets? Like, what happens to all the frequent flyer points I have, or the all the credit that I have at my grocery store where I'm getting all these bonus points, stuff like that. And understanding that, I could easily just give my passwords to Brandon, but, a lot of social networks that I've learned, their terms of service, that password is specific to that individual, not to somebody else who I will it to. So, it's like when I read your book, I went, I got a lot of work to still do. But these are things that today's generation of parent, right, and grandparent, we never had to deal with this stuff, right? But we never did, because everything that we had was in paper form, right, of some type, where today it's moved to digital form. And so that's why, and I came across your book by complete accident, right? I think I was on LinkedIn at the time, and somebody posted about the book, and just the Digital Undertaker, I'm thinking, okay, is this a WWF book, right? When you think of the Undertaker, right? Like I'm going, what's this book all about? And then when I learned about your background in the military, and then with IBM, that small company called IBM, very small company, and I went, okay, maybe she's got a background that I'm interested in. And then when all of a sudden I started to do a little bit about my research, I creeped you online. I went, I think I got to read this thing. And then I downloaded it in a Kindle form. And when I read it, I went, my God, this is a good book, right? Like, this is a really topical, good book that a lot of adults should be reading, but we don't, because a lot of adults don't plan for death. Right? Like we don't until we're moving closer to it. And sometimes by then it's too late. Comments?
Yeah, I mean, talking about death or incapacity is a very awkward conversation. And if you look at perhaps conversations in the past, we could rely on the fact that someone could walk into your home office and find the paperwork. It might not be as neatly organized as it sounds like you've got organized in terms of having a
No,
binder of some kind.
let's
With the
get this
information.
right. Beth has got it organized, not me.
Oh, Beth has got it organized. Thanks, Beth. I appreciate that. Yes, but now when we walk into someone's home office or they're not able to speak for themselves and we are looking for information about what their wishes are, it's going to be a lot more difficult because we're going to be either as children or nieces and nephews or as someone that's appointed, we're going to be looking at a locked screen and we're not likely to be able to get in. So we'll be the first generation to deal with our digital lives in terms of its impact on estate planning. And the first and foremost impact is the role of the person that we're asking to act on our behalf, either because we have become incapacitated, even if we go for surgery, or if we pass away and someone has got to execute on our wishes. So we're the first generation to deal with this. And then the other thing I look at technology with respect to the fact that it's now pervasive in our lives. The pandemic has accelerated everybody online. So we're often probably talking to various generations of our family members and our friends about technology and their use of it. It could be a good conversation opener instead of asking the awkward questions like, where's your will? And what are your funeral plans? We can start with things like social media and say, you have a Facebook account. Apparently 70% of North Americans have one. Have you set up legacy contact and maybe use that as an entry into that awkward conversation and then back your way into those other more important questions, but more difficult questions.
And, to be very honest with you, that's why we like to use the term on life. Right, a world, because I think too many older adults, we still see a difference between the online world and the digital world, whereas to our youth today, it's just one world, or what academia calls the on life world, because like it or not, digital has been totally integrated with where we are today. So that's why I love to use the term on life world, to get people to understand really there is no difference. So when it comes to planning, whatever that planning is, because proper pre-planning prevents poor performance, right? The 6 Ps. We got to do it from an on-life perspective. We truly do. So to help foster this, let's start with the questions I have to answer, or I have for you today. So here's the first question I have for you. It's an interesting question. Why is leaving a well-constructed will specific to your digital dossier so important for your executor? What do you think? Let's hear some answers.
That's a good question. So I'll just bridge off what I said about we'll be the first generation to deal with our digital lives, our online life. And in fact, as you point out, if you think about when I started with technology, I had a bank account that I went into the branch and set it up. And so when technology was applied to our ability to go online, there was a transition that I had to go through and many people have to go to. As you point out, the generations now, they don't even start with the branch. They start online. They download the app and they begin there. So their online life starts digitally. So we need to consider that in our estate planning. We need to include these digital things that we have in our will and estate plans. We know that less than 50% of Canadians have a will.
Did you just say less than 50%?
Less than 50% of Canadians have a will, and even less have an up-to-date one. So they might have created one 20 years ago or 10 years ago, but they don't have an up-to-date one.
Wow.
So most of us know what a will is. Maybe we've just been avoiding getting one done, but it outlines our wishes and our preferences for our loved ones, who are called beneficiaries, as it relates to our estate. Again, these are estate industry terms. And then our estate is just everything we own or we have rights to, things that are important to us. And that can include our pets, for example. So the will, if you think of it as a directive, gives the fiduciary, and as I said, it's called an executor in BC or an estate trustee in Ontario, permission to address our digital assets. That's why they need to be included, because we give our fiduciary direction to deal with our physical lives. So now we need to add our digital lives.
Right.
Now, in traditional estate planning, we think of the traditional estate as our physical property, such as real estate, our homes, even our rights, our property rights, whether that's intellectual property, our collectibles, and as I said, our pets. But now in the digital age, we need to consider our digital footprint and our wishes and preferences for them. It always starts with the will, but as you and I will get into this discussion, our estate plan needs to also include some other pieces of information so that our executor knows where to start with our digital lives.
So just to kind of spider off from that answer,
Sure.
less than 50% of Canadians have a will, and less of that have a current will that they've updated. Of that 50%, what has been your experience that the wills that are in place actually have digital assets built into it?
I don't know of any studies that have looked at the contents of a will in terms of including our digital lives. So
Right.
the law societies in each provinces have been preparing clauses. So there's a thing called a digital asset clause, although it has a different term. And that's the starting point in a will in terms of giving permission to your executor. So how many wills actually have that clause to give permission? And then very much like any asset we own, we may need to do other things to be specific. We may have a significant digital asset, such as a web domain or something that we want to add more specificity around in terms of beneficiaries. And, those may get included in our will. And then we need to think of, we have a pile of digital assets, all our online accounts, and then we have significant ones, and how we address them legally. A legal advisor can give guidance on that, whether it's in the will itself or additional documentation. So anecdotally, I don't believe a lot of wills actually include a digital asset clause or specifically identify digital assets of significance. I think we're just beginning to get our arms around this in the estate industry and just beginning to talk to our clients about it.
So are you really busy now then with educating those in the legal profession who prepare wills on this very topic? Because again, I find, in my 30 years in law enforcement and having to deal with death and that a lot of people who I spoke to, in fact, I have a very, very close friend who was in law enforcement. His father just passed not too long ago, and he was having a heck of a time having to deal with, passwords, all that kind of stuff. So are you really busy right now educating like the profession that does the estate planning and the legal side of things, i.e. lawyers, on this very topic to get them up to speed on this stuff?
Yes, I'd say that's predominantly where I'm spending my time in educating as an author and a paid speaker. Most of the requests that I get are either associations affiliated with estate planning, financial planning institutions, wealth planning institutions, or legal societies. So I spoke last year at the Canadian Bar Association. I have an invitation in the fall to speak to the Ontario Bar Association.
Good for you.
And very much like estate planning of our property rights, there are many dimensions to estate planning. There's what is it? In a case of digital assets, it's the technology management and technology side. And then there's a legal aspect, so the lawyers, and then there's a tax significance too. So tax advisors who help people in estate planning are going to have to consider learning about this as well, because if you sell a web domain, what's the cost base of a web domain? They'll have to figure those kinds of things out. So the industry is beginning. Certainly in the estate industry, we've seen people talk about it because we can see the articles and papers going back, to 2010.
Yeah.
So this is not new, but the pandemic has accelerated the conversation. The adoption and discussion about non-fungible tokens actually have accelerated sort of general awareness that we have digital lives as well. So I'm getting a lot of requests to talk to advisory organizations about how to begin this with their own advisors, and then how do we start talking to clients about it.
Excellent, which kind of segues nicely into my next question, and here it is. Today's assets, such as money, memory, and records, are in digital form rather than paper form. What are some of the assets that we need to be thinking about that may not be obvious to some, like loyalty points or cryptocurrency issues in today's world, right? Like cryptocurrency is becoming very popular right now, and upon our death, like these are things we never thought about. So what are some of the others that, you know, us mere mortals need to be thinking about when it comes to estate planning and will planning?
Yeah, so digital assets as a term, it sounds like a technology word. So, they are simply our electronic records, but as you said, much easier for us to think of them as our memory, like photos, our money, whether it's on online bank accounts and our unregulated cryptocurrency, or our records, right? And those are certainly more relatable definition. If we even look at something like our records, our home office is now a digital home office. Our online lives is in our inbox, right? So the chances of your executor or fiduciary getting access to your email is going to be pretty low. So we have to take additional steps. As convenient it is to use email to manage our lives and pay our bills, it also presents a barrier to our executor. Now, the Society of Trust and Estate Practitioners, STEP, which I'm part of, considers that these digital assets have a financial value and a sentimental value. And those kinds of terms are very relatable when we're discussing things in the estate industry, because whether we're talking about our pets, which have sentimental value and are part of our families, or even our coin collections which have financial values, looking at it from a financial and or sentimental value, we can have both, gives people some constructs to start thinking about, oh yeah, I need to consider them in estate planning. So we know unregulated cryptos have financial value, as can web domains. But as you point out, so can loyalty points. Let's get into talking a little bit of loyalty points, because those are always fun.
Or frequent flyer points, right?
Frequent flyer points, right? And from an estate planning point of view, we're going to have preferences on who receives our crypto assets, who receives our web domains, and who received our loyalty points. So documenting those intentions or wishes is what we use a will and other estate planning documents to deal with our physical property rights. So we need to do the same thing with our digital lives. Those prized digital assets need to be addressed collectively and then specifically. Now, when we think about technology, if we want to put that in technology terms, it's not unlike thinking about backup and recovery plans, right? So if you're writing a manuscript, we all know, if we leave only one copy on our laptop and we don't print it out or back it up in some other way, our laptop could get lost or stolen or be corrupted, and we might lose that. So we have to think about it in those terms. And then from a business perspective, people think of their business, it's administrator access or business continuity planning. And those instructions that our IT departments at work, or even in a small business, if we outsource, would be doing, we need to bring that home. And I guess the one thing I'll say about digital assets is they're, by their nature, virtual. So there's no longer a paper trail, even for them. So how is our executor going to know from a technology management perspective? And as I said before, you can't walk into a home office and find a digital trail unless you've left some instructions and had conversations with the executor.
Now, I can already hear this happening. What about like my parents who say, well, we don't use the internet, or we've barely ever used the internet or anything like that. I said, yeah, but do you do any kind of online banking or anything like that? And they said, yeah. But I already, I can imagine you've heard this from the older generation, like older than my parents, saying, well, I don't need to know about this stuff because I have no digital assets whatsoever. Is that true?
I don't believe it's true. I always like to use a dated StatsCan study, which was published in 2010. And it said at the time, 90% of people over the age of 65 used email. So we have 10 years of email use. So it may be complicated to have a discussion with someone to say, do you have a digital asset or not? And they're likely to say no. But the best conversation to have is exactly the way you framed it, is to say, do you do your banking online? Do you pay your bills online? What do you use your email address for? Because if we ignore the significant digital assets for a minute, like like unregulated cryptos. The conversation could be simply, have you left me a binder of information about what bank accounts you have and what investment accounts you have? And as you know, the sort of when I talk about it in my first book, Your Digital Undertaker, people are uncomfortable even doing that.
Yeah.
And what I recommend is you don't need to put bank account numbers, financial institution numbers. You don't have to put balances. You simply need to provide a list of the institutions you deal with and perhaps a contact, right? Because that is enough for the fiduciary executor to start your job. So just beginning the conversation, maybe it is simple as that. There's no, people shred documents for confidentiality and security reasons, and we've been probably doing that for quite a few years now. So it's just a question of, what are your wishes as it relates to your physical property, and how am I supposed to know what it is?
Awesome. Next question I have for you. Password sharing, even upon death by most service providers, is a no-no. I know Facebook, Google, and Apple allow for pre-planning options upon death, but what do you recommend for others? And, I really didn't understand the no-no part until I read your books, right? Like, I just thought, upon my death, I'll just kind of, in my death book that Beth has created, I think I mentioned that, we will just put all our passwords in there and just give them so Brandon has them. But truly, that's a no-no, right? So, but I also understand that some of the bigger players out there have started to create these pre-planning options. So I'd love to hear your comments on kind of both of those queries I just posed to you.
Okay, let's start with password sharing. I think you've stated it nicely and unequivocally that password sharing with your executor is a no-no. And the reason is it's against the terms of service, and it's not very cyber secure to do so. We wouldn't share our passwords while we're living, so we shouldn't be doing it, leaving them out after we've deceased. But the one thing that I often talk to people about is it's just practically not going to work. Do you want to rely on something of significance on a password that could get changed, that requires secondary authentication methods? And as you know, there is a lot of cybersecurity practices being brought in place by service providers to check which IP address you're logging in from, and other ways to restrict patterns of usage that you haven't used before. So they were never designed for estate planning. So when we look at these big tech giants like Facebook and Google and Apple that have announced or have pre-planning tools, they're starting to address these requirements. All of us are going to pass away one day, and our digital assets need to be passed along in a manner that it meets cybersecurity needs. So as you pointed out, my second book, Digital Executor, was not only written for advisors, it was written for the tech industry and businesses to start to discuss our clients' requirements and therefore demands that clients are going to be making of them in that manner. Now, pre-planning, you got the term correct from an estate industry perspective. But if you go online and you search for a pre-planning tool in Facebook or Google, it won't come up because they've now all invented their own terminology.
Of course.
So Facebook has pre-planning choices. You can decide to have your account deleted or memorialized. And when you pick memorialization, it asks you to select a legacy contact. Google has a pre-planning tool called Inactive Account Manager, where you select somebody who will be your inactive account manager. And Google, in some respects, doesn't address death per se. It's about periods of inactivity that you select. So in some respects, they also address incapacity. And you can choose between 3 months or 18 months in which your account becomes inactive before this inactive account manager has access. And then Apple, as we know, has announced, they call it their digital legacy program. And they indicated they may be using a term like legacy contact, same term as Facebook, although we'll have to read their terms and conditions to determine what it means. So what's also interesting is there are some other social media platforms that do address incapacity and death, but they deal with it after the fact, which means there are not pre-planning options we select in advance of death, but there are options for the fiduciary executor. And one would hope they would continue to move down their journey and provide us pre-planning.
What are some of those?
So to give you two examples.
Yeah.
Instagram allows an account to be memorialized or deleted. Again, your fiduciary or executor is going to have to contact Instagram. They have a form you can fill out. LinkedIn quietly provided functionality so you can have an account memorialized or deleted. But again, the fiduciary executor will need to know your wishes. So it comes back to documenting your preferences. Now folks want to start with social media.
Sorry, just to interject. Why did LinkedIn do it so quiet? Like, I had no idea LinkedIn did that, to be quite honest with you. Why would they not make something like that more widely known? Because this is a good thing, right?
It is a very good thing. I did find a news article announcing that they were working on it. And the only reason I tripped over it myself is when I was checking the references on my second book, Digital Executor. I thought, I wanted to make sure I went and checked them, and it was there.
Oh, there you go.
So, no, I even posted on LinkedIn and said, why isn't this a big announcement?
Yeah.
Apple has made it a big announcement.
Yeah,
it was even part of their ISO release, which I thought was tremendous.
I'm an Apple fanboy, now so when they announced that, I went, yes, right? So
yes, it's great when the big tech giants do it, because then perhaps others will do it, because every single platform we need that we use online is going to have these considerations built into it in some way.
Right.
Now back to social media. If you want to start with social media, epilogwills.com has developed a social media will, which is free to use. They've picked the popular social media. You can capture their wishes and create a directive. So
what was that called again?
Some temporary things. Epilogwills.com.
Thank you.
They're a Canadian company run by two estate lawyers, and they have a social media will, which is free to use. So you can go in there and they will walk you through asking what province you're in and a few things like that, and which social media you use to print out a directive. Now, why don't we talk about that good one, loyalty points, loyalty, reward, credit card, power points programs, right? Yeah. Loyalty points, as you point out, are governed by the vendor or provider terms of service. So you're going to have to look them up. Rewardscanada.ca wrote a really nice blog in June of this past year, and they've covered some of the big popular ones in Canada in terms of what happens on death. And they've highlighted who allows transferring of points, how to do it, and who doesn't, right? So there's kind of like the who done it. So the big one, Air Miles, allows you, I got a couple examples here for you. So Air Miles allows you to transfer reward miles to beneficiaries by completing their Air Miles Estate Matters form. I thought this one was an interesting one to look up, which is Cineplex Scene Program, allows for the transfer of points. Wow. Aeroplan also allows the points to be transferred to beneficiaries of the estate, although I found their language quite confusing. WestJet, you can also transfer your points, but it has to be done within 90 days. So the reason I'm kind of giving you some of these examples is it's completely dependent on the vendor or provider about if they allow the points to be transferred, under what terms and how it work. Now, in terms of those that don't, Canadian
just
Tire
before you go on 90 days,
rewards program.
Just before you go on 90 days after death?
Correct. Okay. Which is pretty tight.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
There's lots that happens, and you might not even be thinking at points at that point.
Yeah.
You're grieving, you're making funeral arrangements, you're just trying to get your head around this. So I found that quite constraining. In terms of two that don't, and I've written extensively about one, Canadian Tire Money, their Triangle Reward Program. I've always been a big fan of their paper money. They're forfeited on death. I think there was a news article a couple of weeks ago about a grieving spouse who was trying to get points of her husband. So I think one of the, I think it was Global TV, had to get involved, and they continue to affirm their position. So I look at the ones that don't allow transfer on death as just simply a symptom of the marketplace demand is not there yet. I think this is going to be a competitive necessity in the future. We won't accept this as consumers, I believe, in the long term. And the other one, you talked about grocery stores, PC Optimum points are forfeited upon death.
Really?
So, use your points. Yeah.
Huh. I might have to do a tweet on Canadian. That surprises me that Canadian Tire doesn't do this, considering who they are and what they do across this country, right? Like, how hard would it be for them to just say, yeah, we're going to honor it under these conditions, and just kind of use the blueprint of some of the other big players like WestJet and some of the other ones out there? Although I agree with you, 90 days is a very tight timeline when you're considering all these other issues. But maybe I might have to put a tweet out there and see if it catches fire a little bit to kind of help deal with those types of issues. Next question
before you go there, so rewardscanada.ca has a nice list if you want to check out some of your favorite or popular ones. The only other thing I'll say to sort of balance the equation is we do a lot of things online for free in our personal account, right? Mm-hmm. And a lot of these loyalty programs are free. Our use of social media and email is often free. So I know from working at IBM and leading teams, including policy groups, that every single policy that you have under these terms of service has us to administrating. So in some respects, I understand the reason why some of these programs may not, because again, you're going to have to set up a program, you're going to have to maintain the program, you're going to have people behind the program, and that has a cost implication to it. So not to suggest that's not going to influence the marketplace. And I stand by, I think the marketplace is going to demand, and this will eventually be a competitive necessity. But just to give you the fuller picture of the equation on potentially why they don't, it could lie in that scenario.
Next question I have for you is, how can we navigate the challenges surrounding digital assets in Canada when many of the most popular vendors are based in other countries, such as the United States? I mean, this is an issue from a law enforcement standpoint, right? Where and now as an online investigator, now that I'm retired, sometimes these vendors are located in countries outside of Canada, which now makes any kind of a Canadian court order they just can't be executed, right? Because they're Canadian. So how does this apply when it comes to this topic?
Well, that's a doozy of a question. Good
You're
thing
welcome.
It's morning and we have lots of coffee still. Right?
You're welcome.
You're right. The short answer is yes, as Canadians, we are affected by U.S. vendors in terms of service. Now, one of the first steps in planning, I'm going to cover that first, and then we're going to come right to the root of the issue. One of the first steps in planning, whether that's your physical property rights and now your digital assets, is to create a digital asset inventory, right? So we need to know what we have. That can seem overwhelming to most people because perhaps they have quite a significant online life, and there are also, online providers, digital asset vault providers who are providing solutions. But what I recommend that people do is start with the top 3 online things that they have of significance that they would be devastated if they could not be transferred upon death. Now, for some, that is photos. For some, that's loyalty points. For some, that's their web domains. And sometimes a significant digital asset could end up being a bit of an ecosystem. So if you have an online account that you perhaps maybe even sell your hobbies, suddenly that online account is associated with a financial intermediary like PayPal. So some of these significant digital assets may be a little ecosystem. So let's just get that on one piece of paper, and then start to unpack the terms of service. Like, can you even transfer that asset? Because you might find in some circumstances you can't. Now, after the big one, which is terms of service, we talked a lot about that. And I thought loyalty points was a great way to sort of cover that. There are laws that apply to us upon death. So we may never encounter laws in our life, but laws apply when we die. So in each province and territory within Canada, we have what in effect is called estate and succession law. And these are laws are provincially based, just as they are in the US, they have state laws. And they define what is a legally valid will and what happens if you die in what's called intestate, when you die without a will, who gets what. So it kind of lays it all out. There are additional laws that need to be addressed, postmortem privacy laws. And one of the big ones is called fiduciary access laws. So this is legal territory, big words to say, what is the executor or estate trustee allowed to do with your digital assets and your online accounts? Now in Canada, we have bodies that create proposed law. So the body in Canada is called the Uniform Law Conference of Canada. in 2016 published a proposed law, Uniform Fiduciary Access to Digital Assets Act. But as of today, the only province in Canada that's adopted it, sort of taken the model law and then legislated it in the province, is Saskatchewan. Now, this proposed Canadian fiduciary access law, what an executor is allowed to do, basically gives executors the same rights as they are allowed to do with physical assets. In other words, they can step into the deceased person's shoes.
Right.
But this is not the same in all countries, including our US neighbors. And here's where the problem comes in. Now, we need to pay attention to what's being adopted in the US states, because that's where all the tech giants live, right? Now, let's step over the border and look at the US situation in terms of what they're doing down there. Now, most US states, I think it's 46 now, have adopted a form of what they call revised fiduciary access law. And the short term that the lawyers will use when they talk about it is called RFADA. Not to generalize law, because it is specific in a jurisdiction, but what's notable in the model law, in other words, what was proposed to be adopted, is it gives fiduciaries or executors the right to some digital assets. But here's the big but. Any that are communication in nature, email, text messages, social media, requires the will maker or the person while they're living to have provided directives while they're living. And if directives are not provided, the executor is not allowed access. Now, for a technical practitioner like myself, who people with the technical management aspects, and lawyers help with lawyers, legal, and tax advisors help with legal, this is still really significant, right? There's no default here, right? Like our physical assets have a default estate and succession law. So if you don't leave a will, the law will tell who gets what. And your executor can't pick up where you left off digitally. Right.
So again, another reason why having this built into your will helps. And, you know, one of the things I found from a criminal standpoint, here in Canada, we have one criminal code. In the United States, every state has their own code. Right. So what's illegal in Oregon may not be illegal in California. But what you are saying is that there's 40 plus US states that have kind of signed on to this one document that you're talking about, that as long as this is built into a Canadian will for the executor, then that definitely helps.
That's a starting point, but there's other things we have to do. So to be specific, if you don't use the pre-planning functions provided in Facebook's legacy contact and Google's inactive account manager to start, you'll need a US court order to get access to a Canadian's Google Gmail account. And we saw that in a case in Ontario called the Miss Henry case, right? So what we don't know yet, and again, brand new territory, is, you know, there's a blanket digital asset clause in a Canadian will work with the US money. And there's the other big problem. That's why a will is not sufficient. It's an absolute starting point. We have to do other things, and we've got to provide other estate planning documents and directives. Is the executor going to know you have a Google Gmail account, right? So they can't randomly go to every tech provider in the you know, because they interviewed your family and I think they had a Gmail account, but what was your Gmail account? It's called account identifying information. So, you know, you might have one nickname, but you might have hundreds of usernames. So again, back to where I started with this question, although we started with passwords, is having some sort of digital asset inventory. And again, start with your big ones, because, you know, you may not list everything in your house and you may not provide wishes for everything in your house other than important things. You want to do that with this same way with the digital lives.
This is so important because our company, we've been contacted on several occasions now by families whose child had passed unexpectedly, usually from an accident. And now all the family want are the pictures, right? That were on the child's device, be it an iPhone or into their accounts, right? And it's quite difficult to do, as you can imagine, right? And so that's why these legacy programs, like if the family actually had the Apple, what does Apple call it again with regards to pre-planning?
Apple, They've announced they're going to call it legacy contact as well.
So there's a really good example, is that once this thing passes, if your child does pass by by accident, at least you'll still have access to the account to retrieve those pictures. That may mean a lot to you, right? But again, so important to understand. Like, these are things like you never think about until we're talking to people like you to get us thinking this way. And it's a growing field, right? Like, things could change.
Things could change. But, like I said, a lot of people use Facebook, a lot of people use Google, and certainly a lot of people use Apple. So let's start there. And, anyone of any age can actually fill out the legacy contact. Yeah. So I think it's important to start that conversation and start, as they're updating their privacy settings. Yeah. If I could digress on privacy for a moment, and certainly we know we have computer abuse laws in various jurisdictions, and we have postmortem privacy laws that have to address this as well. Just filling out and acknowledging that, we have some of these pre-planning tools that we can use is pretty important too.
Yeah. Next question I have for you. Identity theft is the #1 crime being committed online. Can you please speak to the topic of obituary identity theft and what families and executors should be thinking about when it comes to obituaries? Like, for us, doing what it is that we do, like when we're talking to kids, one of the things that we say to kids is identity theft is now the #1 threat and crime to teens, because they have this thing called virgin credit, which the online criminal is looking for, right? So why is this so important when it comes to a new term I learned, obituary identity theft?
Obituaries.
Yeah.
It kind of boils down to our online lives. Our obituaries are now globally accessible, right? When you consider originally obituaries used to be quite short, a couple sentences with basic information and published in a local, actual physical paper. Obituaries have gone online. With our online lives, they've gotten way longer and are globally accessible. So AARP, a large organization in the US, reports that crimes begin with thieves trolling through obituaries, where they collect name, address, and the birth date. I talk about this in both my books about how secondary pieces of information are now becoming part of identity theft. So the place you went to school and the degrees that you got. And identity theft can happen after death of a deceased person, and we don't think of that. I did find one really good stat, which is quite alarming. It's another American stat, but we can extrapolate the Canadian. According to fraud prevention firm ID Analytics, each year, identity theft and identity thieves steal personal information of nearly 2.5 million deceased Americans. And they use it to fraudulently open credit card accounts, apply for loans, get cell numbers, or other services, right? So these obituaries in a digital age need a rethink. We now need to consider scaling back, starting with not using the date, not using the birth month, and perhaps not even using the birth year. I know the genealogy crowd won't be happy, but personal information, as you know, is the starting point to identity theft.
Yeah, I remember when I first started the policing over 30 years ago, I remember we arrested a person for identity theft. And what he was doing is he was going into graveyards and looking for fresh graves that had just been done. And he was stealing the information off of the headstones as a way to collect personal information for the purposes of identity theft. Well, basically, we've taken the analog identity theft that person was using, and we're now moving into the digital realm, right? Where, like you say, when you look at some of the things that are posted online after death, there's just a ton of information there that people can harvest and use for the purposes of identity theft, right? There really is. Last question I have for you. I always end all my interviews this way: is what is your message to families when it comes to online estates and assets planning in today's on-life world? Notice I always use that word on life. I mean, if there was, in a very small answer, like what would be your recommendation that everybody who's watching this, other than buying your books, we'll talk about that, right? What would you recommend?
I'll set some context first. So the pandemic has accelerated our digital usage regardless of age, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we're all online. We even had to go online to book our vaccine appointments. So everyone is online. You can't deny that. I do really worry about vulnerable populations, such as the elderly. And just as you, Brandon, and the White Hatters are doing a tremendous education and advocacy role for digital literacy for young people and parents, we really need to do the same for all ages as a result of the pandemic internet use. Because we're not going to back out of that. We're not going to suddenly use our virtual conferencing to connect with our family and then not stop using it. We're online now. What I outlined in Digital Executor is we'll now all need to consider our online world and how we manage that online world. So I call that our digital lifestyle management techniques. So we've brought IT to our home in very pervasive ways, and we need to consider that IT department in our home lives from the perspective of digital literacy, right? And it doesn't take much. You can follow some people on Twitter. In fact, I follow you guys, and you always have some great tips and good YouTube videos about what's happening and what's going on. So you don't have to go and take it's tremendous if you have the opportunity to take an online course, but, just following someone to get some tips, tightening up our cybersecurity practices, which is a big theme of your YouTube videos, locking down our privacy settings and deleting accounts we no longer use. Unfortunately, the pattern, you could talk extensively about this, Darren, but the pattern you see is, small businesses or weak institutions that don't have good IT departments get hacked. And then suddenly, you can see that when you start pumping your email addresses on IBM Pond in terms of how many vendors have been hacked. So if you don't need an account, delete it, lock down your privacy settings. And we know as sometimes with updates and the term of service we agree to, for those updates, we don't realize that some privacy settings, end up being toggling back on. So privacy setting isn't a one-time activity. It's an ongoing activity. And I'll digress on privacy settings for one moment, because even with Facebook, one of the things I started to realize is your privacy settings in life become locked on death. So if your Facebook account is open while you're living, it's open on death. If it's closed while you're living, it's closed on death. And that's significant because you may want it locked down after death. So what I do recommend to people is lock down your privacy settings. And if you need to set up a second business account for Facebook that does something that you want to share more globally, then set up another Facebook account to address the specific need that you have. Say you want your hobby online, separate it from your personal life and your personal friends, and have it open where you don't mind, perhaps, right? So believe it or not, the first step in planning our digital estates or digital asset planning, whatever way you want to talk about it, is cleaning up our online lives. So I encourage people to do that. Just get better at some cybersecurity practice, military term, but buy good kit. The technology that you use at home accesses everything in your life now. It's the gateway to our lives. So we need to protect it. And learn a little bit more, even on a basis of following someone on Twitter that gives tips that are how you can clean up your privacy or your cybersecurity. And then finally, I'd suggest everyone get a will. When you become an adult, that's the first time it's important to get a will. For parents, it's particularly important because you're going to name your wishes on who is going to look after your children if something happens to you. So there's hundreds of reasons, regardless of age, to have a will. And then, certainly, if you have time, sit down with your executor, who in the digital age is going to be faced with a lock screen, and express where they can find information about your life.
Great answer. If you could just stick around, Sharon, I want to talk to you offline here a little bit. I'm just going to move to my closing now. So I hope everybody truly appreciates why I wanted to leave this to the very end as our last Thinkable Thursday, because Sharon and what she does is so important. And again, this is a topic that we don't necessarily want to talk about. Like, she blew my mind when she said only 50% of Canadians have a will. Like, unbelievable, right? And in today's on-life world, it is becoming even more important why we need to be thinking about this, especially when it comes to our legacy and passing things over, especially to whoever that may be it our kids or somebody else. But I want to emphasize again that I truly recommend that you check out her books. There they are right there, Your Digital Undertaker and The Digital Executor. Again, I think personally, for the average mom, dad, aunt and uncle, grandma, grandpa, those types of individuals, Your Digital Undertaker is the book to start with, for sure. The Digital Executor, I think, is more kind of designed for people who do the estate planning. Having said that, even for people, mere mortals, like I say, like me, I really did enjoy the Digital Executor as well. But I think for most people, the Digital Undertaker is the way to go. Also, don't forget, I mean, Sharon talked about this, how important it comes to issues surrounding everything to do with our online security and safety. And we here at the White Hatter, we've written a book called Parenting in an Online World. Although it says parenting, it should say for everybody when you think about it. It's free. It costs you nothing. It's 23 chapters. It's over 250 pages now on everything that parents need to know when it comes to keeping yourselves and your kids safer online. And what's really cool about a web book, it allows me to evergreen it. We knew that if we wrote a book on this topic, things in the tech world change so quickly. So by the time it got published into a paper book, it would be outdated already. So that's one of the reasons why we decided to go with a web book, is because it allows me to constantly keep it evergreened and updated. Good example this week, I just updated it on online gaming because there was some good research that just came out. So I wanted to update the book, and it's free, and you can find that on our website. So great interview, and what an awesome way to end this summer series on Thinkable Thursdays with Sharon. And I hope that you all enjoyed the Thinkable Thursdays this summer, and we look forward to next summer's Thinkable Thursday series as well. So on behalf of myself, the entire White Hatter team, I want to thank you all for attending today's Thinkable Thursday. And don't forget to follow us on all our social media feeds, including our YouTube channel. Sharon mentioned that. We've got a lot of cool things coming up as the fall approaches. So have a great rest of the summer, everybody, and we'll see you next year for Thinkable Thursdays. Bye now.